What's up? Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Happy Wednesday to you. No matter where you are in this world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. But thank you for being a part of today's special town hall. Today, we are going to be talking with some students and talking about what life is like for them as students looking to become counselors in this wonderful world of counseling. And so today, I'm going to be introducing our two guests today. They by no means will speak on behalf of all students, but they will definitely speak from their perspective. And before we even get started, let me share with you the reason why we do these town halls are to connect, to have an opportunity for us at ACA, staff and volunteer leaders to meet and talk with and greet all of our members and those who are interested in knowing what we do here in the world of counseling. And so it's very, very exciting to have you all here. But before we get started with anything, I believe Rich Yep is here and is going to share a few words with you. You're muted, sir.
How many times do I say that to people on Zoom?
How many times?
I'm telling you. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Butler. And I just wanted to welcome everyone as well on behalf of the staff. I'm especially excited that we're going to hear from students, because when you think about it, it is really students who are going to be doing the heavy duty counseling for people well into the middle of this century. So the staff and I are here to help you, and I'm glad you're here, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Butler.
Yes, well, thank you, Dr. Well, soon to be, well, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know why I'm calling you doctor. Well, anyway, so soon to be doctors are a part of our phenomenal guests today who are going to be sharing some comments with you, what it's like to be a student in today's world and what they're doing for self-care. And so it is really important that we kind of listen in and hear what they have to say. They don't know this yet, but I'm going to be asking them to not only speak from a doctoral student perspective, but also what it was like for them in their master's program. So start thinking about that as well as you're answering questions today, Ashley and Taylor. So let me start by introducing Taylor J Irvine, who is definitely here to kind of share her perspective. She resides in Florida right now as a student, and she's a candidate for her doctoral degree at Florida Atlantic University. She is also a licensed mental health counselor and a nationally certified counselor in the state of Florida. Taylor has clinical experience working with various populations and presenting issues in community mental health and residential treatment settings. She is a current Chi Sigma Iota Leadership Fellow and a 2001-2002 Emerging Leader for the International Association of Marriage and Family Counselors and the Association for Assessment and Research in Counseling. Two things. Her research interests include studying couples and infidelity, eating disorders, and body image concerns, and promoting culturally responsive practices across the counselor education programs. Next, we have Ashi Pition. I know her as Ravis. She is now married to one of my former students, Guskard, and she is a fourth-year PhD candidate in counselor education and practice at Georgia State University. Ashley's academic and professional interests include generational trauma and healing, multiculturalism, and social justice in counseling and counselor education, leadership, mentorship, and advocacy, and qualitative and mixed methods research. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Ashley has served in a number of leadership and advocacy roles, including graduate student representative and fellow for the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, leadership intern for Chi Sigma Iota. There's a theme here. Both of them are really heavy in Chi Sig. Intern and fellow for the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, LGBTQ Institute. And she currently serves as the graduate student representative to the Governing Council of the American Counseling Association. So there you have it, our two very, very phenomenal student representatives who are doing phenomenal things as their students. Let me welcome them in. Taylor and Ashley, how are you?
Doing good. Thank you so much for
Good.
having us.
Good. Yes, thank you for that welcome. I'm really excited to be here and connect, like you said, I'm connected with folks here today.
Definitely, definitely. So, one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of talk, Ashley, you and I had a conversation, where's the students at? What's going on? We doing all this stuff on the ACA, but where's the student perspective? And I heard it. It went right in and I said, okay, let's get this together. And so can you tell me a little bit right now about what your role is as a governing council representative as a student?
Absolutely. Yes, I wanted to first thank you, President Dr. Butler, for hearing my cries. That's true. He's speaking the truth. We had a conversation following one of our governing council meetings, and I just really wanted to bring student issues and happenings to the forefront. We do make up a large percentage of the ACA membership as a whole, and so I wanted to just have us be more part of that dialogue. And you asked about my specific role. So if you kind of familiarize yourself with the governance of ACA overall, there's this thing called the Governing Council, right? And there are representatives from each of the divisions and some other sorts of things. And one of those other sorts of things is the student body of ACA. So we do have a graduate students and new professionals committee as part of ACA, and you might be part of that, or at least get emails from us through ACA Connect. But I was nominated through my home division, which is AMCD, but not representing AMCD. There is an AMCD rep for the governing council, but divisions tend to nominate nominees for the student rep position, and then there's an election that happens, which there should be some results today. But that happens and I'm here. So you may have voted for me. If you didn't, that's okay. But I'm really, really excited to be here and be talking about student concerns and matters here. I see Brittany put
there's a two-year commitment for a student to come in and do this. So they can be a master's or a student at a doctoral level as well.
Absolutely. And that's something I wanted to talk about today as well. I appreciate you for calling for Taylor and I to reflect on our experiences as master's students, because I feel really strongly about getting master's students involved. So I'm just curious if it's okay with you, Dr. Butler. I wanted to invite folks to share in the chat on where they are in your programs. I maybe assume that a lot of folks here are students. So if you are, then share in the chat, maybe the type of program you're in, whether that be a master's
and how you can get them involved. Ashley, I'm looking for students to get involved.
Yes.
So let me bring Taylor in real quick, because Taylor, you got a call not too long ago asking you to be on today's town hall, and you graciously said yes.
Yes.
You're doing some phenomenal things in Florida. I see you from afar. I've been doing some other things, but I got to see you and what you're doing. One of the things that's really exciting for Chi Sig this coming, I don't know what month it is, but I know that you all have a virtual conference coming up. You've been very instrumental in doing that on top of doing your schoolwork. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got involved.
Yeah, so my involvement with Chi Sig started in my master's program. I know we'll be talking about it a little bit later on, but I think that was most fundamental to my own self-care, and just having that networking, those networking opportunities and those connections. And it kind of just built from there. I became president of our chapter. That was something that I think it was the first time in my life that I realized, wow, the gift of service, and it's different than our counseling identity. And when we provide service in that aspect, the leadership identity became kind of foundational to my overall identity. And so, it was the first time where, there's some imposter syndrome at first, kind of dipping your toes into leadership for the first time. And that's just at the institutional level, but kind of starting to branch out a little bit. And that actually started through ACA and kind of trying to figure out where do I belong, thinking divisionally, what should I apply to, where do I want to conduct service, what does that look like? Those were all kind of questions that began for me at the master's level, I think.
Yeah, and you're very, very a go-getter, right? You are very action oriented. You think ahead of the curve, so to speak, in terms of the types of things you've been doing. And you're very open to suggestions that people provided. I looked at you over the years that I've gotten connected to you and saw that you helped to kind of inspire what Florida is doing with this CSI conference. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you got involved with all the folks who are leaders in Florida to get this thing on the ground?
Sure. Yeah, so the first conference was about, 4 years ago. FIU started off there and reached out to all of the other chapters and just asking how we could get involved. And so started off there just doing, proposal reviewing, seeing how else we could get connected that way, meeting people at that initial conference. And then during my tenure as president, we were, FAU was supposed to be taking on the next round of doing the conference, and then COVID hit. So we actually did our virtual version of that last year. And so, yeah, it's just been, I think, such an incredible opportunity to collaborate with people who are genuinely invested in creating this every single year, reaching out. We have, databases and chats where we communicate regularly. And so, yeah, it's just been a really, although it is a lot of work on the back end, I would say it's definitely contributed to kind of grounding me and my overall just sense of wellness. Yeah.
Both of you, now that you brought that up, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing for self-care? And what are some of your suggestions to others who are looking to get into leadership and or are having a struggle right now while they're in their master's or doctoral program? How can they also contribute to their self-care? What are some of the things that you might want to share with them? Yeah, Ashley, go ahead then.
Okay. So I first want to say that self-care is dependent upon the self. It's going to be different for everyone. I think that goes without saying, but I wanted to preface what I'm saying by using that because what works for me or others might not work for you. So I'd really just encourage you to tap into what feels good or healthy for you, despite what you might hear in today's conversation. So I wanted to also just talk about the fact that while we may engage in self-care, like things that help us to cope with hardships that might be due to our program or the pandemic or just life circumstances in general, I also really like to stress the importance of community care and really like systems level care. So I do have a bit of a systems background, I think very systemically, that's my theoretical approach. And so my brain also goes there when it comes to self-care. And I think that there's a quote from someone, and I always forget who said it. So if someone knows the originator of this quote, feel free to put it into the chat. But we talk about how the goal of counseling should not be to help people cope with oppression, right? So just teaching them how to deal with these systemic things that are working against them, but we should also be engaging in advocacy that helps to better those systems, right? And so I think about self-care in the same way, that we're not just, we shouldn't be just thinking of how to cope with life stressors and the day stressors, but be thinking about how we as a community can create better environments for people to survive and thrive and to be well. So I say that to say, engaging in systems to which I have control over, that making those choices that I can be in places that value my wellness, right? So that might be in terms of, I see a lot of folks that are in internship. So it might look like being selective about where you intern based on feedback that you've heard from other interns or students from that program. It could also look like, I know for me, a big part of being a master's student was making that decision on like where to go for my PhD program. And a part of my self-care was choosing a university where I know that I felt safe, both emotionally and culturally, and choosing a place where I know that I wouldn't be like in fierce competition with others that might just bring me down in a very related way. I see some head nods. You kind of get where I'm going with that. But so that's more of a systems level kind of care, that sort of thing. So self-care for me looks like, I'm notorious in my program. People know that I don't have email on my phone. So I don't even we use Outlook at Georgia State, and I don't even have the Outlook app on my phone. So if I'm not on my laptop, then the email will not get seen. And sometimes I may, if I know that I have a deadline or something like that, then I'll maybe log on from my web browser if I'm just replying to something really quickly or waiting on a specific thing. But I really try to only be accessible when I'm like at my laptop or computer ready to work. And then I also typically, for the most part, I don't work on weekends. So I know that I always get like a few eyebrow raises, like how can you be a doc student and you're not suffering and in pain and losing sleep and all these sorts of things, but I have hard boundaries. Right. So I
that myth is over. Thanks. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you though, Ashley, when you think about it, you talked a little bit about individuals sending people back out into the world, so to speak, after they've helped them find wellness. Talk a little bit more about that, because, and Taylor, feel free to come in here as well, because I do believe that it's unfortunate to help somebody find themselves and define their autonomy and send them back into broken systems, right? And so can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective and what you've seen?
Yes. So you mentioned my perspective, and I feel like I have multiple. So me, like as a person, as a Black woman, and also as a graduate student in the counseling profession, I just feel like there are, it's hard, and especially being in a global pandemic on top of that, that is still going on. We're not post-pandemic, despite what folks may say. But I do feel like, and I guess it may be kind of boiled down to a values conversation, which I know that is laden with a lot of asterisks and maybe yellow flags of caution as we talk about values in the counseling field. But I guess I personally and culturally really value the essence of like taking care of one another. And so when I think about mentorship, even advocacy work, or even like the clinical work that I do with my clients, even when it comes to my research, when I'm doing my dissertation, like I feel called to be helping in some way, right? And obviously in return, I expect to be a part of a system that is also helping me. So not that I'm some martyr, just giving it all, and I'm just, I'm the person I'm the giver, I'm the giver, but I aim to exist within systems where there's like a culture of community care. And so to be concrete, that might look like, for example, so within my doctoral program, I'm going to use a master's program example, since it seems like most of our folks here are in master's programs. So when I was a student at UCF with Dr. Butler, my cohort and I at the time, when it came time for us to take the CPCE or the NCE equivalent, whichever you take in your program, the test that you take at the end of your program, we each dedicated ourselves to like one of the core areas of K-CREP, like that fall within those categories for the exam. And we just kind of mastered it. We took notes, we did outlines, we used all the resources like the Encyclopedia of Counseling and all those sorts of things. And we got together and we just kind of reviewed those things together and like retaught each other, if you will, because we learned them in the class. Maybe it had been a few years or whatever the case may be, but we just kind of took charge on those things and retaught them and shared those resources or, those pointers or whatever the case may be with each other. So we, instead of bogging ourselves down, reviewing everything we had learned in the past 2-3 years, we each dedicated ourselves to one of those areas and shared our knowledge and takeaways with each other in that community setting. And it was a really beautiful thing for all of us to be able to pass, especially being that some of the folks in my cohort, English wasn't their first language. And so they had some language concerns and that sort of thing. So we poured extra encouragement and support into those students. And that was a really, I look back on that, and in the time, it didn't feel really fun or like positive. Like it felt like I was just stressed out about taking this exam and preparing for it. But in retrospect, it was it was an experience where, I connected with my community and we worked to support each other through, to see this common goal of passing this exam and becoming clinical mental health counselor. So that's an example of what that community care might look like for me. Taylor, do you have anything to add?
Let's see what Taylor has to say. Yeah, what's Taylor got to add?
Are we talking about what we do for self-care or more in terms of how do we engage with the community?
Well, you can take it from wherever you would like to go, but I mean, self-care, what kind of tips or what do you do for self-care? How do you expect that to kind of play into what these master students who are here and doctoral students who are here, what can they be, mindful of as they're trying to navigate their programs?
Yeah, I think for me, kind of as you were mentioning before, I am a go-getter. That's just par for the course with my type A personality, but it's also the thing that can get me into trouble from time to time. And I think for me, I really had to take a strong, hard look at myself and kind of just lean into the discomfort of being rather than doing all of the time, which for me is a zone of discomfort. I do tend to take on a lot at once. So for me, self-care looks like setting firm boundaries, learning to say no, and being okay with that decision. I found during my master's program, I was really hard on myself in particular during that time, when I would say no, or admitting when I couldn't fulfill a role or a task. I was very hard on myself for that. So yeah, just having to routinely check in with myself and make sure that I'm not doing that. And also actually kind of like what you were mentioning before, just disconnecting from email and social media, especially since the pandemic hit. That's definitely been an added source of stress. So really being mindful of the boundaries I set around that. And I think the last piece is for myself, just making sure that like during a work day, during the week, that I kind of like how we tell trainees when they're working with like clients for the first time, you start on time and then you end on time, and making sure that I stick to that, not the lie I tell myself like, oh, 10 more minutes and I can cram all this other stuff in, and 10 minutes turns into an extra hour. So I found that, really centering around boundaries, and kind of just going back to that ideology of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, that if you sort of take the time, and I tell master students who are contemplating doing a doc program, if you can take a minute to just think of like a preventative wellness plan for yourself before you walk into the door, so to speak. I, for the most part, have stuck to that since when I first started my program, and I still have my handwritten when I started, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that for me led to accountability, I guess, versus, yeah, no, I'll make sure that I'm being mindful of self-care and wellness, and I'll do it. It was right there in front of me. So that was definitely helpful.
Well, cool. So maybe the both of you can answer this question. What is a tip that you would give? What's your number one tip that you would give to students in the doctoral process, so that it doesn't take over their life? So you talked about self-care, but what's a tip that you would share with those who are out here listening that they can take that will help them from not having a doctoral process take over their life?
I think I'll just add to the preventative wellness piece. For me, that was a very concrete, list that I made for myself, and trying to be flexible with that as well. So obviously the pandemic changed the way our lives looked. And so, integrating, okay, now I'm on Zoom for this many hours per day. So how can I alter this plan to be more flexible to our current context? And then for me, I'm a highly visual person. So I do bi-monthly vision boards. And so on one side, I've got okay, these are all of the deadlines and things that are coming up. And on this other side, I have quotes. I have different things that inspire me. And I look at that every day over my workspace.
So Kel, let me ask you a question, because I think that's really important. There are people who are visionary that way, right? They can do stuff like that. So I'm quite sure there are people who are on here who are saying, oh, that's nice that you can do that. But there are some people who that's just not in their wheelhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have that perspective. So if you were to teach them how they can find ways to find themselves, how would you do that? Because somehow you found the vision board as something that's powerful for you. Mm-hmm. I know that some people use color-coded notebooks and all these other things to kind of stay on top of their game. But how do you help someone find themselves so that they don't take on what you're trying to do for your self-care or for how you get through a process, but how they can get through a process?
Yeah. Actually, before I started doing the vision boards, I journaled for a bit, and I sat one day and I created a values list. I do those every so often to see if anything's changed and what's remained the same. And I was finding that for me, engagement and connectedness kept coming up. And so I started noticing that when I'm reading like the ACA journal that comes out every so often, all of my different counseling magazines, I had them in a stack, and then I had my personal magazines, and I would just go through from time to time and cut out different things that I would find inspirational, and I would just set them aside. And I would use those over time to create these vision boards, and I would just pin things on the wall. So it wouldn't be anything that I would draw or I would create. My artistic ability is limited to stick figures. So that's just like a quick way for me to sort of be able to put those on a board where I can see them and it's still there.
That's very powerful. In my classes, I tell my students that. They're like, well, I'm not a creative person. I said, well, you have to find creativity within. And I don't care if you are a stick figure type person. Just draw me the best dang stick figure that you can draw. I'm not worried about the stick figure. I'm worried about where you are taking this to the next level. Ashley, what do you say?
Yes, I was going to share. So I appreciate that Taylor shared something like really concrete, because my advice is going to be less concrete, but something that has really just transformed my experience in this doc program. And I wish that I maybe kind of like enacted it in my master's program as well, is really just changing the way that I conceptualize learning in education. And I say that to say, I know that there is just this general consensus around like being in a doc program that, again, like I said earlier, like you have to be suffering, you have to be miserable, that your life is over, you know, for the 3 or 4 years that you're in your program, that your family and your friends are going to miss you, that your hobbies will suffer, that you will be eating rice and beans. Like there's all these things and these ideas surrounding being in a doc program or being in a graduate school program. And I'm here to say like that doesn't have to be the case. And I think that I was either waiting on someone to like give me permission to like be okay and to not be suffering to get to that point, but through my own personal counseling, which I highly recommend, I was able to kind of restructure like my relationship to my education, but also like the way that I think about, you know, pursuits that I have. So for example, like I've been able to cultivate my hobbies throughout this doc program. I've spent a lot of time with family and friends, even though I'm physically away from them, but I've been able to schedule in time with that even throughout the pandemic. So I'm really blessed in that regard. But I really just want, and I tell mentees of mine and folks coming behind me in my specific doc program, that you do not have to be suffering these 3 or 4 years. That is false. You can work hard and achieve all your goals and all those things, and you can still eat 3 square meals, have hobbies, have friends and family that you still pour into and they pour into you, and get your degree and be employed, be gainfully employed at the end of it. So my advice would be to just restructure the way that you think about this thing, and that you don't have to be suffering.
All right, so perseverance is what I hear in that, right? So it's not necessarily about how smart a person is or how gifted they are as a counselor. It's about persevering through something. So what has been some of the snags in the road for you all that you persevered through that maybe might help somebody else out in their journey?
Well, I see somebody in the chat had mentioned ADHD and anxiety. So full transparency, that was my snag in the road. The combination of those two was, yeah, highly challenging. So I think the first step was admitting that I did need to get help for that, and to address that, and really just acknowledge the barrier that it was placing on my life and my ability to be able to connect with those core values of mine, which were engagement and that sense of connectedness. And I found that once I removed that judgment, I guess, that I was setting for myself, whether I knew it or not, that I was really able to more fully engage in my self-care routine, but also just really connect with my peers and my colleagues, and it made all the difference.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, one of my big snags in my master's program was, so at UCF we had 2 semesters of practicum like at our on-campus clinic that was like run by the Counsel education program. So there was no issues there. Like we all had to go through that together. But for the internship, we had to seek like an external site to do the hours. And so it's 2 semesters of prac, 2 of internship. So when I went to make the switch from prac and internship, I got into an internship at this private practice that had a relationship with the university. But in my work there, I found that the supervisor was engaging in a lot of like very unethical practices. And so as a master's student, I was challenged with, okay, do I really abide by this ethical code and essentially like tell on this person who is big in the mental health field in this area, that has a contract with the university? So that could be like messing with their money and their reputation and all those sorts of things. Or do I kind of just like pretend like I don't see this and go along with it, right? And I did the first option. I had a conversation with the internship, what is it called? Like the person at this university that's responsible for the internship. Yes. Had a conversation with that person, and we were able to really address things in a very cordial way. I'm in a way that made sense, but I did end up having to switch internship sites. So I had to find another site when my peers were already halfway through getting their hours. So I had a lot of catch up to do, and I ended up having to take on 2 extra sites just to meet the hours. And to graduate. On top of that, I had a GA, a graduate assistantship that I had to attend to so that my tuition could be paid. So there were just all these things. So pretty much I had like 3 jobs at one time, and I was just really swamped, like in terms of like hours on my schedule. Like there were a lot of things for me to do just to be able to graduate on time. So that was really hard. I don't know that that's very specific as well. So I don't know if anyone will relate to that.
So
or
you bring up something I would like to ask both of you all
Mhm.
really quickly. I got 2 other questions I want to ask before we go to answer questions from the folks who are in the meeting with us here. But you talked about your internship and finding a space. Can you talk a little bit about both of you? What are the keys to finding a good and securing a good internship spot for master's students?
Well, for me, it was the level of supervisory support. That was one of the chief considerations when I went in for, I applied to, I think, 3 different sites, and one of them had 4 supervisors. So 1 for group, 1 for individual, 1 for family, and then the other one had 1 for all the way across. And my understanding was it wasn't like a set appointment. It would be whenever we could fit it in. And when you're navigating the anxiety of dealing with real people for the first time, knowing that you have that support, that was a huge consideration for me. And something I definitely asked for during those interviews was, what support do you offer your practicum students if you come to work here? I did ask that during the interview.
How about you, Ashley?
For me, so mine was more of a practical decision. So like I mentioned before, I had that GA, and that GA was like pretty much like my hours were set. So I needed a site that would allow me to work around those hours. And then on the other side of that, I really wanted a site that would give me like the experiences with the population that I was interested in. So was really important to me to be able to have experiences in serving adolescents or teenagers. And I also wanted to do some family work as well. So I wanted a site that really cared about not just seeing a teen and like fixing them, like when the parent drops them off and says, "Fix my kid." I didn't want a site like that. I wanted a site that really reinforces and encourages working with the entire family. So that was important to me. So timing, the logistical thing of it, and then working with teens. It was also important to me I know that there were some sites in my area that paid interns in some way, shape, or form. And I know that I had a GA, so I had my tuition stipend, and then I had a tuition waiver, and I had a stipend on top of that. But that wasn't the case for everyone in my cohort. So some people were paying out of pocket for their tuition and fees. And so I really wanted a site. I didn't want to like take that resource from someone else that needed it more than me, that maybe weren't able to secure a GA. So it was kind of strange that I was looking for an unpaid internship. But I know that those positions were coveted, and I wanted to be equitable in that regard.
We're altruistic.
Peers of mine were seeking those opportunities. So
I got, all right, so I'm going to combine 2 questions here, and then I'm going to let questions come in from the audience here. So I want to combine 2. So what resources that you see that are not existing right now that you wish did exist? So now that you've been in the school counseling or you've been in this counseling education role. So from an ACA perspective, right, what is it that in terms of resources that don't exist that you wish were here? But I want you to kind of case that with another thing, right? So what can we as the governing council at ACA and other leaders in the council profession do to help student members thrive? So what's missing? What do you see as something that should be there for our students, and how can we help you thrive?
So one of the, go ahead, Taylor.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say one of the first things that come to mind for me is just access to resources. So I think one of the silver linings of this pandemic is that many things are offered virtually. So for example, like the conference, right? We know that is pretty expensive, especially if you are on a student budget with no outside support. Like it can be really hard to scrape up money to not only afford the registration, but to be able to afford the membership, the traveling, the room and board, all those sorts of things. But I think one of the beauties of this pandemic is that It's allowed for folks to be, present for events that maybe they're not physically able to be present at. So I appreciate that, we have meetings online, even if there is an event in person, we're Zooming people in so they can still be a part of it and that sort of thing. So I will say that I'm just being able to
able to pivot and being creative. I think that's the other part of it, right? Being really, really creative.
Yeah, I definitely echo the accessibility piece, especially since the pandemic hit. A lot of master's level students have never had an in-person class. And so their time that they used to have potentially in between classes or waiting for the next class is now solely on Zoom, in between trying to navigate practicum and family life, work-life balance. So yeah, having the ability to have these resources available online. And I also think maybe just tailoring the way that we offer accessibility. So whereas in the past, maybe like a mass email would have been something that would have been helpful to reach a larger graduate student audience. Now it's kind of going into everybody's spam folder because we're getting so many emails every single day. So potentially offering like an app. We're always on our phones these days. That's how we predominantly stay connected, where all of these resources can be consolidated to a single place where students can go and find it and they don't have to sift through their email. That's potentially one outlet.
Excellent. So my last question, and then I'm waiting to see what kind of questions come in from the chat. If you have a question that you would like to ask, raise your hand if you would, or put it into the chat. And we'll try to go and answer those questions as soon as we can. So there never seems to be enough time, right? So as a graduate student, you're running here and there and all those other things. What is your self-care activity? What do you what do you make sure you do so that you don't hit a brick wall?
I do yoga for me. And so that is something that can be 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day. I don't usually set a time parameter because I find that the more rigid I am with myself, the less likely I am to follow through. But that is something that I find just the disconnecting from all technology for 20 to 30 minutes every single day makes such a huge difference in my ability to be more productive. And I find that just in the process of doing that, not setting a judgment around it, like I only did 10 minutes today and that's not great.
How are you finding, how are you able to do that? Are there free resources for yoga?
Yeah, there are. So I have my yoga mat that I keep at home, and then the Nike workout app offers free yoga classes that you can just podcast to your TV, or you can do YouTube, which I've done as well. And that's just something that I've been able to do at home. And yeah.
Great. Anything you are doing for self-care, Ash?
Yeah, so this might be commonplace to some of you, but it's something that I've had to like build over time. But sleep is so underrated. I feel like in the past I've struggled to maintain like a consistent sleeping pattern, and I'm not someone who can like nap during the day and like wake up and not be groggy. So sleeping at night is like very important to me. I even have like my sleep calendar like set up on my phone. Like on the iPhone, you can like set a sleep schedule. It'll like wind down your phone for you and put you on do not disturb. And there's all sorts of things that can help you with that. But a good uninterrupted quality 8 to 10 hours of sleep for me is like, it's a must, and it's been a game changer.
Very nice. So in the chat, there's a couple of questions that have to do with finding internship sites. Can you all talk about how you can choose the right internship site? You talked a little bit about it. You talked about how you chose the right one for yourselves, but what is that? And there's a question in there in terms of what to do in rural sites. People who are looking for internships who are from a rural environment. I think the person who was speaking is in Alaska. So what are some things that you might be able to share in that regards?
Yeah, actually, that was another strong consideration. I ended up working at a nonprofit mental health community center for my Praken internship. And that was important for me because I wanted to see a wide variety of clients, but I also wanted to see clients from lower SES. And I knew if I went into a private practice setting right away that my capacity to do that would be limited. And that's not to knock private practice. And I would recommend that if students are looking to get involved in that right out the gate, during the interview offering or asking, like, do you offer sliding scale, so that you can have an idea of the clientele that you're going to be engaging with, because that will later inform your clinical work. So for me, that was important. I think now with the pandemic, everything has kind of gone into Zoom land. And so also thinking of the, the ramifications of that and how that's impacted clients. Not everybody will necessarily have access to the technology to do that. And so, asking around and saying, what other avenues are you offering? What does that look like in your setting? So that you have an idea before you kind of sign on the dotted line and say yes and start working in a place like that.
Great. Ashley?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of different approaches to this. I had peers of mine in my master's program who, like, for example, they knew that they did not want to work with clients who present with severe and persistent mental illness. So they wanted to get that experience in their internship just to have it. So they know they didn't want to work with it in the future. Whereas like folks like myself, I wanted the experience with the population that I wanted to work with in the future. So depends on kind of how you think about that, but I would not discount the usefulness of resources like Facebook. So for example, I'm from Florida, I'm in Georgia now, but I'm plugged into a couple of like Florida and Georgia Facebook groups for counselors. And of course, we're not talking about clients in there or anything like that, but you might see job postings or a supervisor say, hey, I'm seeking master's level interns, or you can even post in there like, I'm a master's level intern seeking an internship and XYZ sort of thing. So there are often a lot of opportunities and resources within those groups. So I know, for example, Florida, the group is called Beginning Counselors of Florida. The Georgia one is called Georgia Mental Health Professionals. So you'll see like social work interns and psychology interns, like all looking for sites in there. So that's a good way to connect on the interdisciplinary level. So wherever you are, whichever state, don't discount Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that. Those groups can be really helpful. So that's actually how I found a couple of my internships. I also recommend talking to, if you have access to like folks who are further along in the program. I know sometimes there's not a whole lot of opportunities for cohorts to mix and mingle, but talk to those folks who are in it right now or who just finished it. They will have the most fresh feedback for you on like their experiences on those sites and those sorts of things. And it also might be helpful to maybe talk to professors with whom you don't have a whole lot of interaction with, like likely they've been in the community for some time, if they've been at the university for some time, and they might have a more zoomed out, like larger perspective of the different offerings or like sites in the community that you might be new to. So those are my suggestions. Did I answer that question, Dr. Butler?
There was a question. No, that's okay. There's a question that was asked in regards to ACA and mentorship. So I know that there are some things that we are doing in terms of mentorship, but Ashley, maybe you can speak to it from the student group that you're working with. What's happening in regards to mentorship?
Yes, so mentorship and ACA, there's a whole lot of different things going on. I can speak to some division specific things. So I know that AMCD, which is the multicultural division of ACA, has a mentoring program every single year. It happens every year. So you need to be a member of AMCD, which requires you to be a member of ACA. But it really helps folks who are interested in doing research or just getting connected to the field of counselor education. So that's really helpful. And it's like an application process and those sorts of things. There are more like informal mentoring opportunities. So I know that, or I'm seeing some, thank you, Danielle, for putting that into the chat. There's a mentorship program as well. I know the AARC, which is the Assessment and Research Division, has like a emerging leader mentorship program. So that's the other thing. This is a kind of a phrase in our field, emerging leader. Those programs are typically built around like a model of mentorship as well. So ACEs, the Association for Counselor and Supervision, has emerging leader programs, as well as the regional division. So like Southern ACEs, SACEs, WACEs, NAR-ACEs, like all those sorts of things have their own mentoring or emerging leader programs. And then I also wanted to just encourage you all to not be afraid of informal mentorship. I am at GSU because I, sought out a professor who I really enjoyed reading her work, and I connected with her at a couple of conferences and just asked her like, hey, like, how can I work with you? Like, I want to work with you. And we talked about how that could be a two-way street, because mentorship is a two-way street. So I talked about, what I could bring to her lab and to her discussion, and she talked about what she can do for me. And here I am getting ready to graduate, and she'll be hooding me in a few months. So I encourage you to reach out to folks. A lot of instructors and professors are approachable. I know it can be really scary, but let's just be real. Like, people enjoy talking about themselves and their work. Like, we're doing this work because we're passionate about it. So if you are passionate about something too, don't be afraid to email that person. I wanted to use an article for something. I emailed the author, and now, like, we meet on Zoom bi-weekly to just chat it up because I, expressed interest in this article that I read and, cold emailed them, right? So the worst that you can get is a non-reply, or maybe even a bounce back if their email is inactive. But don't be afraid to put yourself out there and shoot your shot, per se,
Hey,
to a mentor that you might be interested in working with.
That's really good advice. Anything coming from CSI in, Taylor, in terms of mentorship?
Yeah, actually, our Beta Rho Chi chapter here, we started a mentor-mentee subcommittee, and that was something that during the pandemic, a bunch of students, like I mentioned before, they had never even had an in-person course yet. And although we do operate from a cohort-based model, there was still just such a sense of disconnectedness. So yeah, they started a mentor-mentee program, which has been going on, I think, for the past year, and it's been super successful. So pairing doc students with incoming master's level students, and just having that mentorship has been, I think, really pivotal to a lot of students' just sense of overall wellness.
Okay. Looks like I got two questions that I think, and then we have to kind of take a break at some point. So I'm going to ask you really quickly to, because just kind of giving your quick thoughts on this question here. So one is, can someone speak to the micro self-care practices to weave into your day between sessions versus the daily, weekly self-care strategies? So what do you all think? I mean, maybe mindfulness is one of those things, but what are you all thinking about in terms of, as a student, that could help someone in a micro way?
I stare at a tree. And that is literally, I'm not even joking. When I was during my practicum and internship, and even when I was working in a residential treatment setting, that would look like I would take 5 to 10 minutes in between a session, and I would go outside and I would pick a tree. It doesn't matter whatever tree it was, and I would stare at the tree, and I would kind of just use that as a moment of mindfulness. But for me, it was helpful because I do have ADHD, and it is sometimes a struggle to really be focused on one thing versus several things going on at once. It helped to consolidate my focus to a single thing. And so for me, it was kind of being in nature, and I would pick a tree. That would be my micro self-care.
All right. Ashi, anything?
Yes, for me, it's very practical. And like I said, you all might have been professionals at this before, but this was something I had to learn, was to just how to block schedule my day. So I know that before COVID and we were driving everywhere, or, taking public transit everywhere, walking wherever you live, we had that travel time. We had downtime to listen to a podcast or listen to nothing and just be between,
the Voice of Counseling podcast.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Voice of Counseling, quick plug. So we had that downtime between activities, whereas when we made the switch to virtual world in the pandemic, I would stack meetings from, back to back to back concept with no break, right? And it took me a while to have to, schedule in a lunch break. If you look at my calendar right now, it literally says lunch for a specific hour and break. And, because I will just sit at that computer and type away, because I know that I'm not going to be looking at my email later. So I would really just,
that's a really good point. You said that whole thing is, can you help me? Maybe we can have a little strategy. You can mentor me into how to take email off of my phone, because it's going to be a struggle to be able to do that at this point, because I'll go through withdrawal. So I don't know how you did that or what made that happen for you, but we need to talk. So here's one more question. What advice would you give a person age 72 getting back into the field of counseling after working in a non-counseling field for 15 years, having been out of school for 25 years, and finding it difficult to pass the NCE? What kind of things would you do? What do they need to do to possibly concentrate more, or things that they can do to retain their information? How would you respond to that?
I think I'm going to go back to what Ashley was mentioning earlier. There are so many support groups on Facebook, and they're just centered around registered mental health interns. I mean, I've seen NCE, NCMHCE support groups. I know I joined that when I was trying to pass mine as well, and that was incredibly helpful. Just trying to hear other people's tips and tricks on how they tried to pass the exam was super helpful. I know that there's like a lot of phone-based applications where you can, I'm more of a flashcards kind of girl. For me, going through books was really a challenge. And so I think just maybe sitting down and first starting, what's the best way that I learn, and starting with that, and then kind of tailoring your approach to what's most helpful for you.
Yes, I agree with that, Taylor. I would even add something that was helpful to me, and this is something that I've started doing with like a lot of my assessments, is like really understanding how it is scored. So it seems like the person that asked the question has taken it a number of times, but think about like what you need in order to pass and like what that looks like. So I know for some people that might mean like doing really well in one area, and maybe the research or appraisal area is like really hard for you, so just bank on getting all your points in the ethics section or whatever the case may be. So understanding
let me ask you, Ashley, with that being said, is it possible to overthink it? One of the things you shared earlier was getting into study groups and helping people to kind of communicate about it. I think we think that the answer is so hard to find that we overthink it, because it can really be right there in front of us, but we overthink the question. So is there any tips in terms of how to read a question or how to really look at counseling? Because I think you have to have a global understanding of what counseling is so that you then can answer it from that perspective. One of the things I've learned is that you don't go in and try to be so specific about a question based on what you know it to be, based on what your internship responsibilities were, what you learned in your program, that you got to broaden it out a bit, because those questions are looking at it globally and not just from a singular perspective. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I know that there was like a running joke in my master's program, like whenever we would ask a professor a question, they would say it depends. And like literally every time it would depend. Like it was hard to say like
there's a gray area there.
Answer. Right. There was a lot of gray area with a lot of different things. And so I encourage you to approach the exam in that way, but think about like what they might think the answer is. So the resources I mentioned earlier, like the Encyclopedia of Counseling, there's an actual book with practice exams in there.
Yes.
And I think they also have I think it was a CD, but I don't know if it's been upgraded to like an app or something now, but whatever like audio sort of thing there's that as well. So when you do the practice exams, look at like how they are grading them per se, and like kind of program your mind to that, because there is
don't get rid of your books. The other thing I would say, don't get rid of your books. Keep them. A lot of times I know that we're saying that we're a poor college student and we got to sell our books back and all these other things. Keep your books. Those are your resources. Those are the things that you can go to and to support you as you're studying for your NCE exam. All right. Any other thoughts that you all have that you want to share with the folks who are here? And if there's anyone who has a burning question and would like to come on and ask that question, or still put it in the chat, feel free to do so. We have about another 2 or 3 minutes here.
Yes, I just wanted to add in the conversation about self-care and community care, I think a big part of my self-community care as a counselor and a doc student is being plugged into professional communities that I pour into and that they pour into me. So I can't tell you the number of times I've like connected with someone from my master's program, which was now almost 5 years ago. And they tell me like they're licensed, they're burnt out, they're exploring other options. And I asked them like, when's the last time that you've been to a conference or like joined a professional org and like gone to a meeting and like spoken to someone other than your clients and your coworkers, like the people that you like share the room next door with, like talk to other people, in different parts of the country that are like doing the same thing that you're doing. You could be learning ways to work more effectively or to serve your clients better. To take care of yourself better. So, and oftentimes like you end up making friends with people that you meet in these organizations, folks that, lift you up when
support
you're
groups are
down.
so powerful. Support
Yes.
groups are just so powerful. So Taylor, any advice from you? And then we're gonna bring Brandy in, who's gonna tell us what we're doing with our breakout rooms. So Taylor, anything?
I would just say don't knock the small stuff. So that looks like that micro self-care. So, sleep, hygiene, eating 3 meals a day when you can, but also in terms of just leadership, going to a conference or doing maybe a poster presentation. Maybe if those things are smaller scale, but they can lead to bigger opportunities down the road. And I think just you know, kind of getting out of the frame of mind of, oh, you know, it's just, I'm just attending, I'm not really doing anything. It's still engagement.
Going is a pump me up, right? You
Yeah.
go and you see things, like one of the things you talked about, Ashley, is you go to a conference and you see someone that you read about or that you used their research in, and see that they're a tangible person, that you can touch them and you can communicate with them, within regards to that. I want to thank both of you, Taylor and Ashley, for coming in and just being phenomenal in terms of sharing your knowledge base. I believe that, you know, one of the things that we want to bring in, so that there are males and there are non-binary individuals who are in counseling, and that we need to talk about those perspectives as well. But we need people to reach out and to communicate with ACA as to what we can provide for them, especially for students who are in need. So thank you both for your time. I know that you all will be going into a breakout session to continue to talk about graduate students and things along those lines. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy, who's going to tell us what's next for us.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Butler. Ashley and Taylor, that was a phenomenal conversation. Thank you both so much again for being here. So attendees, it's time for us to go into breakout rooms. We have a few different options available. If you've never been in a meeting where you can self-select your own breakout room, you'll want to pay attention to the bottom menu bar, and you might even get a pop-up window on the Zoom screen. You will see a list of our available breakout rooms. To add yourself, you will just click on the room that you want to join, and then you'll just magically transport to that room. If you'd like to switch rooms, you need to come back to the main room and then reselect your breakout room. So those are just a couple pointers on getting to the room that you want to be in. If you have any questions, you can just unmute yourself and let us know, and we can help you go to the room where you want to be.
And what are those rooms? Can you just name them off real quick?
Yes, we have a room for school counselors, practitioners, counselor educators. We have a topic focused room, which is where Taylor and Ashley will be hanging out for a little bit. And then we have a chat with Dr. B, where you'll be.
Where I'll be. All right.
All right, so our events team is going to go ahead and turn those breakout rooms on. And if you're able to stay, we'd love to have you.
Thank you. Please stay and communicate and network and all those great things. We're looking forward to staying connected.